Hey you, and welcome to our first lesson. In this lesson, we are gonna review the present simple, which we have covered before, but this will be a review. And we will also review the differences between whose and whose. They both sound the same, but they're completely different. We'll also talk about who, whom, which, that, and where, and how to use them correctly in English. All right, so are you ready? Let's get to it. Hey guys, and welcome to our first lesson. In today's lesson, we will talk about the most basic tense, which is the simple present. This is a review because we have covered it in the previous course. Today we are gonna just review it. As you know, it's the most base form except for a verb to be, except for the be verbs, which are more basic. We use a present simple when we talk about habits, routine, facts, or things that always happen. We also use a present simple when we are using frequency adverbs, such as always, sometimes, occasionally, often, and so on. Okay, so to use a present simple, we just use the base form of the verb as work. I work in London. I live with my mom. Those are facts. So with facts, we always use the present simple. Also, when we have long-term things, what does that mean? Like, I work in London. That is also considered a long-term thing because you're not going to change work every day unless you work for a temp agency, and that is a whole different story. But normally, you work in a place for a while, or you can say, I live in this building. I live. See, we use a present simple because when you live in a building or you live in an apartment or in a house, you are going to be there for a while. That's why we always use a present simple. Now, if we use the present simple with a third person singular, okay? So if we use he, she, it, or a single noun or a name, in the present simple, we always add an S after the verb. Don't forget this. She works in London. He lives in Berlin. Now, if we have we is plural. That means we don't need to add an S to the verb. We have fish every Sunday. They visit their parents once a week. So visit, have. We always use the verb without an S because it's plural. Okay, so let's take a look at the question format when it comes to the present simple. Do you like the piano? Do you like the piano? Where do you live? So notice do, does. Now with you, we use do because as we said, and you have to pay attention to this, we only use the verb plus S if we have he, she, or it. Also, if we have a single noun. All right, this is pretty terrible. Let me redo this again. When we have a single noun, okay, or a name. So we always plus S. We always add S. But if we have I, you, we, they, or any plurals, we don't use an S. Okay, so do you play the piano? Do you play the piano? Now, if I replace the you with he, what is the correct question? The question will be, does he play the piano? So this S will be added onto the do to become does. So this will be, does he play piano? Okay, does he play piano? In this case, we are going to add the S because we have he. Where do you live? Again, here is you, so do. But if we say where does she live, we're going to add an S to the do. Does Jack play football? So why did we use does here? We use does here because it's Jack, and as we said, it's a single noun or a name. With single noun or a name, we always use does. Does Jack play football? Where does he come from? Do Rita and Angela live in Manchester? So here we have two names, not one name, two. That makes them plural. Do Rita and Angela. Where do they work? We have they. So we use do and does to make questions with the present simple. Remember, when we use do or does to make questions, that is called auxiliary questions. All auxiliary questions are yes or no question. Now, if we want to ask real question to get information, we need to use the question words. What are the question words? They're why, what, when, how, who, whose, whom, and so on. Those are the question words. We use a question form before the auxiliary verbs in order to get more information. But if we just want confirmation, we ask yes and no questions, and those are called auxiliary questions. Just a quick reminder, auxiliaries are the do, and the be, and the have, and the models. 4 families of auxiliary. Right. So with the third person singular, we always remember to add the S. If we have I, you, we, they, we don't add an S, so we will use do. Okay, now negative with present simple. Same thing, if we have I, you, we, they, we say we will just add not with the do. If we have he, she, it, or a single noun or a name, then we will put does not instead of do not. Okay, let's take a look. I like tennis, but I don't like football. I don't like football. I don't live in London now. I don't live. I don't play. They don't work. All these we use do not, don't. Now, if we have third person like John, John doesn't live. So we will add the S to the do. That will make it does. Angela doesn't drive to work. She goes by bus. Again, here we use she to refer to Angela, so we added an S after go. We use do and does to make negative with present simple. We use doesn't for third person singular. Okay, now present simple and present time. We use a present simple to talk about something that is true. Okay, these are the uses of the present simple. We use them to talk about facts, something that is true. I am 19 years old. What, did you think I was older? No, man. It's just the bad lighting. I am 19. I am a student. He lives in London. So with the I am 19 years old, this is a fact. It's your age. I am a student, this is your occupation or what you do in life. He lives in London, another fact. Or this could be considered a long-term thing. Remember, long-term thing, it means something that will continue to happen for a while. Something that happens regularly in the present, we use a present simple. So something that happens routinely or on regular basis. Like for example, I play football every weekend. I play football every weekend. Now, something that is always true. These are like scientific facts. Something that is proven to always be true. For example, the human body contains 206 bones. Light travels almost 300,000 kilometers per second. Those are scientifically proven facts, so we always use a present simple. Okay, now let's take a look at these. People get them confused. Who, whom, that, which, and where. When do we use those? The confusion between the confusion is always about the use of these. Who, whose, whom, that, which, or where. So today we will talk about how to use them correctly and when to use them. Who is used when we are referring to people. Okay, like if you want to ask a question about a person, we use who. The person who answered the phone was very helpful. The person who answered the phone was very helpful. So here we are using who to refer to people. The person who answered the phone is very helpful. We can also use it in the question form, who ate all the chocolates? Who ate all the chocolates? We use who because I want to know who is the person who ate all the chocolate. So the person who ate all the chocolate is hiding over there. Who for people. Now let's take a look at which. Which does not refer to people. Which refers to things or ideas. And okay, and also which we use it to ask about a choice. Like, which one do you like? The blue one or the green one? Which is your favorite book? Which one is your favorite book? So which is to talk about ideas, to talk about things, or to talk about choice. Let's take a look. My car, which is 20 years old, isn't worth much. Isn't worth much, it means it's not that expensive because it's an old car. It's a 20 years old car. So here we use which to talk about a car, which is an object. It's a thing, non-living. Which size do you like? Small, medium, or large? Which size would you like? Now here because we gave someone a choice. We gave him 3 choices. Do you want a medium? Do you want a small? Do you want a large? Which one would you like? Okay, now let's take a look at that. We use that for both, for things or for people or for ideas. Okay, so that could replace who or could replace which. Okay, it should be noted that, however, that who is preferred when referring to a particular person. It's just considered, okay, what does that mean? That means is, if we talk about people, it's better to use who. It's just grammatically better, but you can also use that. It's also correct. All right, let's take a look. When that is used, it's usually referred to classes or types of people. This is the style that I want to use. This is the style that I want to use. Now here we can also use which, right? So we replace that with which. We remove the which and we put that. This is the style that I want to use. The car that belongs to the company is the red one over there. The car that belongs to the company is the red one over there. So we could have used which here too. The car which belongs to the company is the red one over there. He is the kind of person that or who can be trusted. He is the kind of person who can be trusted, or he is the kind of person that can be trusted. Now, in this following case, we cannot use that. All right, let's see why. I want to speak to the person who called me this morning. Here we're talking about a specific person. We cannot say that called me this morning. Here we have to say who called me this morning. The person who borrowed the dictionary should return it as soon as possible. So again, we use he here and not that. We can't use that in this particular sentence. Okay, so let's talk about whose now. Whose is different than who. Who when we're talking about a person, but whose is when we're talking about ownership or possession. So we want to know who owns this or who does this belong to. So for example, I'll say, whose dictionary is this? Whose dictionary is this? I mean, who owns it or who does it belong to? I'll use whose, not who. There's a girl whose car was stolen. There is the girl whose car was stolen. It means the car that was stolen belongs or owned by this girl. So whose is for possession or ownership. Now, let's talk about whom. Whom is a little bit confusing. In modern English, whom is very rarely used. We just replaced it by who. Now, a quick recap. A quick review here, just a reminder. We have subject pronouns and object pronouns, right? So we will take he and she only. So we have the subject pronouns and we have the object pronouns. Okay, you should know this and you should remember them because we covered them in the previous course, the beginner's course. So he, she, and then we have he, she, it, you, we, they. Those are all subject pronouns. The subject pronouns, it means you remove the subject, the person who is doing the action in the sentence, and you replace it with a pronoun that refers to that person. So, for example, if I say Alex is watching TV, I will replace it with he is watching TV. Or if I say Samantha is at work, I will say she is at work. So those are to replace the subject. Now, if we are using a pronoun to replace the object, the he will become him and the she will become her. So instead of saying Alex is watching a TV, he is watching a TV, we will replace it by I told Alex. So if I want to replace Alex, it will be I told him. Or she went with Samantha, she went with her. So if I use the object, it will be him or her. But if I use the subject, it will be he or she. Same thing applies to who. Now, subject pronouns are used with who, and object pronouns are used by whom. Now, that is the main difference between who and whom. You keep in mind that if the answer of the question is he or she, then the question should start with who. If the answer to your question is him or her, then the question should start with whom. Okay, let's take a look at this. To whom did you wish to speak? To whom did you wish to speak? So the answer will be here, I want to speak to him or I want to speak to her. Hence, we used whom for the subject because we are talking about the object, not the subject. If we are talking about the object, we will say, who would you like to speak to? No, actually, this is not the object. This is just modern speech. Because correct English, correct grammar, it will be whom would you like to talk to, or whom would you like to speak to? Because it's still, the answer is still him or her. That means the question should still be whom. Now, if I want to use who correctly, for example, I would say, who wrote this? Who wrote this? All right, let's write this example. If I want to say who wrote this. Now the correct answer will be he wrote this or she wrote this. That means who is correctly used here because we are talking about the subject and not the object. If I want to use whom, then I will say whom did you go with? Whom did you go with? Now, is the use of whom correct in this question? Of course it is, because the answer is I went with him or I went with her. So him or her in this case is the object. I went with him or I went with her. That means the question should have started with whom. But if I'm referring to the subject, he or she, like in this, who wrote this or who wrote this book? He wrote this book or she wrote this book. Then we are talking about the subject. All right, let's take a look. The person to whom you are referring to no longer works here. The person to whom you are referring to no longer works here. It means the person that you are talking about doesn't work here anymore, and this is just a formal English. In the modern English, we'll just say the person who you are referring to no longer works here, and this will be correct grammatically because I'm talking the person who you are referring to. I'm referring to him or I'm referring to her. So I'm referring to him, that means whom. But in modern spoken English, we use who, which is perfectly fine. But if you want to talk grammar, then we use whom. If we want to be like 100% correct grammatically. So again, just a reminder, don't get confused. Whom when you talk about the object, who is when you talk about the subject. Both can be replaced with who in modern English, and that is considered fine. All right. Whom is always used when it's preceded by quantifier. Now, what is a quantifier? A quantifier is all, both, few, many, several. A quantifier just tells you if we have a lot or little or few, or also if we're uncount nouns like a kilogram or a liter, those are all considered quantifiers. It's just to tell you how much you got, because they refer to the quantity. That's why we call them quantifiers. So whom is always used when it is preceded by quantifiers. Preceded, it means if a quantifier comes before it, then we use whom. All right, let's take a look at some examples. She addressed the spectators, most of whom remained seated. We're talking about the spectators, most of whom. So the quantifier is most of. Most of, that's why we use whom. We cannot say most of who remain seated. Not modern, not formal, not informal. It's just wrong. With quantifiers, we always use whom. The mayor welcomed the boys and girls, all of whom wore their school uniform. All of whom. So the quantifier here is all. He greeted the soldiers, many of whom were injured. Many of whom. Again, another quantifier. All right, now let's talk about where. Now, where is easy. Where is a relative adverb, refers to places and locations. Like, where is the station, please? You want to know a location or something, so we use where. That's where I spent my childhood. It means we're talking about the area or the location or the place where you spent your childhood. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. I know a woman, she speaks 6 languages. So which one of these are we going to use here? We can use who, because we're talking about a woman. So we will say, I know a woman who speaks 6 languages. Don't forget the S, because we're talking about one woman, single, and speak is a present simple. I know a woman, her husband speaks 6 languages. I know a woman whose husband speaks 6 languages. Now, why did we use whose? Because we're talking about the woman's husband. There is possession here. Woman's husband. Her husband whose speaks 6 languages. I spoke to a person yesterday. I spoke to a person yesterday. The person to whom I spoke yesterday, this is grammatically correct and it's formal. The person to whom I spoke yesterday, because I am referring to him. Now, if we want to use the modern informal format, we can say the person I spoke to yesterday, without whom or nothing. Or you can also say the person who I spoke to yesterday, okay? So it's considered acceptable. I live in a house, it is 200 years old. Here we can use which or that, because as we say which, that can replace which. I live in a house which is 200 years old, which because it's a non-living thing, it's an object, it's a thing. Or we can say I live in a house that is 200 years old. That's the hotel, we stayed there last year. Okay, that's the hotel, we stayed there last year. We can use where I stayed because it's a place, or we can say the hotel that we stayed in last year, because we can replace that to, we can use that to replace which, or we can use which and we will say That's the hotel in which we stayed last year. All are perfectly acceptable. Now let's talk about whose and whose. As you can see, they're different. They're not the same. One has an apostrophe. Ooh, that's too big. Let me just adjust the size here. Okay, so one has an apostrophe, as you can see here, and one has an SE at the end. Now, they both sound the same, but they are completely different. Whose with the apostrophe, which is this one, could be one of two things. Could be a contraction for is, or could be a contraction for has. As you can see here, who's coming to fix the bed? This is a contraction for is. And who's eaten the last muffin? Now this is a contraction for has. How do you know which one is which? You look at the verb that follows. If it's a contraction for is, then it's followed by an ing. This is the rule for all verb to be. Is, am, are is always followed by an ing form of the verb. This is the rule. If it is followed by the past participle, which is the third form of the verb, that means it is has, because has is always followed by the past participle, or verb 3. So if you want to know what are we contracting, is it is or has, look at the verb that follows, which is right here. If it ends with ing, it's is. If it's past participle, then it's has. Now, if we're talking about whose with this one, with an SE, that means we're talking about possession. For example, if I say, whose sandwich is this? Whose sandwich is this? I'm talking about who owns this sandwich, or who does this sandwich belong to? And if I say, whose dog is this? I want to know who is the owner of this dog. So this will be it for today's lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed, and don't skip the quiz, and I'll see you in the next class. Have a good one.